Hi, I'm David Glenn Taylor, and this is the Voyagers podcast. I struggled with how to start this week's podcast because I am an optimist at heart, and having difficult conversations around difficult topics is, well, it's difficult for me, especially when my impulse is to always frame everything as positive, upbeat, and moving in the direction of general awesomeness. Take the issue of systemic racism, for example. I have many black friends, and we don't exactly get together to talk about racism over a good bottle of whiskey. We don't really talk about race at all. My conversations with them are like my conversations with all of my friends. We talk about our kids, we talk about our jobs, about sports, and about the things that bring us joy. That is, until this year. The conversations in 2020 have admittedly challenged me. I have been pushed on quite a few occasions to look in the mirror, recognize the position that I am in as a midlife, Caucasian, American male. And while I'd like to pat myself on the back of how enlightened I am, the truth is my big takeaway so far is this. I am not a very good listener. Not about this topic. And now that I've come to that unpleasant realization, I am duty-bound to do the work necessary to change that, because if we can't listen well, we aren't going to get past this 2020 funk. We've got to get the ball rolling, and I believe that it starts with listening. So, as much as I'd love to bring you another story about food or wine or rays of sunshine this week, instead we're going to talk to an author and a former professional athlete who's been spending his time engaging audiences and challenging them to think differently about race in America and the UK and the rest of the world. Steve Zakuani is a broadcast analyst, an author, and social influencer from the Congo, but who grew up in Tottenham, England. He was the first overall pick in the 2009 Major League Soccer Super Draft, chosen by the Seattle Sounders. In his post-career life, he's written 2 books reflecting on his career, the injury that ended it, and the resilience it takes to move on after such a tragedy. My twin brothers Seth and Steve have been friends for many years, and so they both joined me recently to get into the deep end and help me get my listening ears tuned in to the experience being had by my friends of color. So when did it start for you? I mean, when was that first kind of notion?
So growing up, I knew there's racism forever, but the conversation Seth and I had probably 2011, 2012, around that time, I was in the mindset at the time that most people, not just black people, but most people are, where when you think of racism, you're looking for the overt acts of prejudice. And that is all I was thinking of. And I probably at that time could think of maybe 1 or 2, but they weren't even that clear. If someone asked me, have you experienced racism? My answer was no, I haven't, because I knew it existed, but personally, I hadn't experienced it. That's the answer I would have given you at that age. I'm a reader, so I go through phases of what I'm going to read. And then as I dive deeper into actually studying, not just because the black history I studied, okay, civil rights era, different leaders, I'd done that part, so I knew it was there. But no, I went back into just reading general history about Africa in different places and the founding of America, the British Empire, and those things. Then it began to really open up like, oh wow, this thing, I actually experience racism every single day. And I became more aware of it, small things in my body, or walking down the street and seeing a white person and crossing the road to make them comfortable. Getting into an elevator with a white person and making myself as small as possible. Going to take a walk. If the sun's down, do I wear a hoodie? If I wear a hoodie, I look suspicious. I shouldn't wear a hoodie. So even making fashion choices based on how I'll be perceived, and not realizing that I shouldn't have to live that way. I shouldn't have to be so accommodating just for existence. So then it was like a rebellion almost, where I almost now exclusively only wear hoodies when I'm out, just because I can and I want to, and I don't care if I'm a threat. So it came that way. But yeah, the awakening of that was just from a wider understanding of history, re-examining certain historical figures, re-examining my own schooling in England, like my history classes. Who did I learn about? What was left out on them? Buying those biographies, reading those, and then viewing the world as it is and realizing that no, actually the systemic side of it, you're always going to get the loud, overt, outward prejudice. So that's sure. But the deeper issues are the ones that are so embedded that even if you removed all white people, the system would still discriminate against black people, because it's the system that's doing it, not the individual people necessarily. And that's for me kind of, I would say, the last few years, something I'm aware of and live with, and trying to learn and understand more.
English soccer is kind of has a reputation around the world for dealing in like kind of notorious kind of racist acts in terms of those kind of overt bullying of crowds and actually kind of thinking. Were you aware of it when you were in the city? You were in the Arsenal system?
Yeah, so it's actually funny because I was having a conversation with my dad the other day. So when I was 11, there was a racist incident in one of the teams I played for. So I played for several teams, and in one of the teams I played for, at the time I called it out, and the club swept it under the rug. And we tried to pursue it. And the club kind of said, there's not enough corroborating evidence, even though myself and 2 or 3 other teammates had seen it and brought it to the coaches. It kind of got swept under the rug. So you see that. I mean, England is notorious because you had black players playing for the England national team, the highest level you can attain in the country sport, who were subjected to bananas and monkey chants and things like that, who were representing the country, and they were subjected to go back home. And so, yeah, it always was aware. You grew up in North London, but where I played was in the east side of London. So most of the teams I played on and against was mostly white community at that point. And you'd have 1 or 2 black guys on each team. And you would hear from the sideline parents saying, don't let the colored kid get the ball. And it was part of daily language that you're numb to it. You're not thinking about it. So for me, fortunately, ever have like monkey chants or banana skins or anything like that, the age I was at, we weren't exposed to that. In England, I think if you're in the football world, you're aware because you quickly learn the history of some of the great black players and the fights they've been making since the 70s, 80s, 90s, and what they go through. And then at Arsenal, my last year, my coach was a black guy called Paul Davis. We played 500 games for Arsenal, and he would talk to a few of us black kids on the Arsenal team about his experiences. And he actually got suspended when he was a player. I think it was like 10 games for punching a guy that gave a racial comment to him. So yeah, that he bought it for me as well and showed me the football side. The one era where I would say I was grateful for football is that it was maybe the one true meritocracy where if you're good enough, you probably will make it. Now, the access to the sport, that is not meritocracy. That's still with privilege. But once you're in, if you're good, usually it works for you and you can actually make it based completely on ability alone.
Speaking in England, I mean, Europe in general kind of has a lot of those. I mean, in the other kind of major footballing nations in Germany, and it's the same kind of thing you say that the kind of problem happens on the systemic level, on the access level. Now you've been in the United States. Pro sports is dominated here. With the exception of hockey, the major pro sports are dominated by African American and people of color. Do we have the same kind of access problem here?
With soccer, yeah.
With soccer,
that's the ironic thing.
Soccer's a rich kid's sport.
Yeah, with soccer, because I could not believe when I got here and then realized that the kids and families were paying anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 for a season to play for a club. Because
that's how much it costs.
Oh yeah, easily.
Okay,
if you're one of the top teams, if you're an academy player, like I say, like a Crossfire or something like that, you're paying $12,000 to $15,000 a year with all the travel.
Now, that's one kid. So if you have 2 kids, you're out of the picture. So that is where, the access with soccer here is unbelievable. The more I began to think about that when I was growing up, if that was the case, I never would have got into it in the first place. So I was grateful that in England, there's no costs like that whatsoever. So here, soccer for sure in America is a rich sport because disproportionately poor people are minorities. They get X'd out initially to where I think the US national team, if we're completely looking at, I think I'm thinking of 1, maybe 2 kids that truly came from the inner city. Truly. Like you still have African Americans, but even those ones aren't inner city kids. Like there's maybe 1 or 2 guys who were truly inner city, poor, welfare state, and were able to somehow work their way up. And even they had so much help from outside forces. With basketball, reminds me a lot of what soccer is in Europe. If I go to New York or certain places in the inner city, I'm seeing kids just playing in the street. You're age 5, 6, 7, 8. You've got a basketball in your hand. There's, little basketball centers, outdoor places. People just play. Where you go to England in the inner city where I grew up, you drive in the summer. Probably if you go there now, everybody's just on the streets playing soccer. It's just what people are doing. Whereas here, I don't see kids doing that. Soccer is very organized, very controlled. It's not a natural thing you gravitate towards, and you need money to even get in behind the door to have any kind of experience. So if I was born in America with the same family, the same circumstances we had, I would not be a professional athlete.
What would have been your sport?
I would have chosen baseball, the least running and the most money. Yeah.
No, man. Yeah, dude, it always makes me think of some of the players that I was a big baseball fan growing up, and I always think of like
Steve Balboni and Ken Phelps, these guys with huge beer guts, they're playing pro ball and making tons of money.
Cecil Fielder.
Cecil Field. I know. Holy cow, right? That's
Hey, can I ask a question here?
Yeah, go.
So, Steve, one of the things when we talk about the issue of racism, like you and I are friends, we've had a lot of late night conversations over good Spanish wine, and I am curious about, like, when you said earlier, you're talking about coming to that recognition of the system. I know you could probably go for an hour nonstop with like laying out what that system is and how it works. If you could consolidate that a little bit, that'd be great. Yeah. But what I would like to hear your understanding of the system. Yeah. Just because that's, I know you've probably, explained this to a lot of people. I've witnessed you've had to experience like a lot of Black people, a bit of tokenism, right? Because everybody's one Black friend, you know what I mean? And so we got to call Steve, and Steve will explain, and Steve will do this thing. And I'd love to hear some of your experience of that. And then when you said it's the system and we have to change the system, there's always this question of how do you change a system? Do you start with the individual? Or do you start with the system? The system changes the individuals and the individuals change the system. And I'd love to hear your understanding of that, because like this was something for me that woke up individually inside me. And now I'm wanting to have an effect on the system, and I'm coming up with ideas to affect the system. And so I'm curious how you see that.
For me, it took me a while to understand this. Now I do. The system, which I'll explain my understanding of it, is it actually isn't broken. The system is working exactly as designed. It was designed to serve a very small group of people at the very top of society, and it is working exceptionally well for that group of people. That's how it was designed. So you actually can't reform. You talk about a lot of police reform and reform this and defund that. You actually can't reform the system. It has to be completely dismantled, completely, and you have to start from the ground up. I was born in the Congo. Now, the Congo is a product of colonization. Colonization is one of the most horrific things to ever take place on planet Earth, to the point where, as a Congolese kid, my first language was French, because we took the colonizers' language. In school, I learned about Belgian chocolate, and I learned about different Belgian kings, Belgian princes, before I learned about African and Congolese warriors and royalty and stuff. So you're indoctrinated with this is better. Congo was given to Belgium in 1885. There was something called the Scramble for Africa, and they pretty much divvied up Africa in how they would. Great Britain, you get that. France, you get that. Belgium, you get that. Portugal, you get that. And so the Congo was given to these people. King Leopold ruled the Congo, killed 10 million, at least, Congolese people. And my dad and mom, when they were in school, they were actually taught that King Leopold was a good, benevolent king, because he gave them roads, and he gave them school, and he gave them clothing, even though he killed 10 million of their ancestors. Right. But they were taught for the first 12 years of their schooling that he was a great man, until an awakening happened. We found out who he really was, and his statue came down. But all that to say, whether it's America, whether it's Great Britain, whatever it is, when we say the system is in place, is you have to figure out, okay, so you take education, for example. Whose education as it's built? Who's it designed for? 7% of the population in England, of all people, go to private school. Only 7%. So 93%, like me, go to these crazy public schools, and kind of where it's just crazy. Now, if you take government positions, 74% of people that fill any government position, from prime minister down to local levels, 74% of them went to private school. So the 7% end up becoming 74%. And so the 93% have 26% to fill. So that's what I mean, for example. Sure. When I'm going to school, we're trying to get through the day. Teachers don't want to be there. Teachers are telling the Black kids you'll never become anything. You won't survive. They come to the inner city to teach, and then they go back to the suburbs to live. Whereas if I went to a private school like Oxford, Eton, or Cambridge, I'd be getting trained to become the next leader. You're told every day you will be the financial people, you will be the prime ministers, you will be the leaders. And so that alone, that indoctrination, sets you up for that. You're driving a nice car in the UK, which happened to me before, you get pulled over. And the police say to you, we're pulling you over because this is the kind of car drug dealers drive. Now, it's also the kind of car people that own their own businesses and make decent money drive, which is what I happen to do. So I can say that to him. But in their mind, this is what, if you're Black, it's a drug dealer. But it's the same car that the prime minister drives. Right. And he would never be pulled over and accused of being a drug dealer. So it's those sorts of things is where the police are in place, for example, to protect the state. So that's why when people get surprised that property violence, when people riot and break down property, brings in the guard and the police. No, that's what they're there for. They're there to protect the state's interest, which is the property, not the people. So at all levels, essentially, you start to see this thing where education, whether it's banking, whether it's housing, when these things were being formed, at the inception of banking, at the inception of mortgages, at the inception of giving out loans, at the inception of whatever it was, Black people were legally not allowed to participate. And so once they got the right to participate like we do now, we're 200, 300 years behind. And so that system isn't designed for you. And so a Black person with a mansion or a black person with $1 million, a black person, whatever, is the exception and not the rule for us, because you were never designed to participate in that. So systemic racism is essentially the idea that all of the different things that make up a society are not for certain people and they are for other people. How do you reform that? How do you reform a system
That's a great question. I mean, how do you?
No, how do you reform when the police can shoot someone in her sleep and we're 4 months on and no one's been arrested?
Right.
And the investigation is being handled by the police. The police investigate the police. And then in all these cases, what you'll have is the person who pulled the trigger will get reassigned to a different city, a different state, and we'll never hear about them again. And no one actually gets brought to justice. You can't reform police union. You can't reform a nation where one man can have 180 billion and there's people sleeping on the street. And we praise that man and put it on magazine covers, and that's the epitome of success. When you can't earn that money, you're going to exploit someone along the way. You can't reform that. And Martin Luther King, I'll say this, said, you can't tell a man to pull himself up by his bootstraps when he doesn't even own boots. And I think that's where people don't quite understand. It's kind of like, oh, I did it, you should do it. And no, that's not how it happens, because we actually don't have the same access, same resources. And then you get exceptions. Well, LeBron did it, well, Oprah did it, as if that validates the 30 million others who live below the poverty line. You see very few black lawyers, very few black doctors. It's not normalized. And so you watch TV, LeBron James is there. Then you go to YouTube for music video, you see Jay-Z. You see, so yeah, rap it, because that's what they see. But what I would say with that is the higher you go up. So how many black NFL owners? How many black NFL GMs? So if you're saying 75% of a league is black, but then the positions that are filled mostly by former players like GM, president, etc., they're not black. In England, for example, the highest league of soccer in the world, essentially the English Premier League, has been around since 1992. So we're talking 28 years now. They've had no more than 5 black coaches in almost 30 years. How is that possible is what I would say. In England, a study was done, I think it was a university called the Warwick University. They gave teachers exams taken by students, intelligence-based exams. And they told the teachers, the students, race, gender, where they're from. When it was given to the teachers, they marked those papers in a certain way. So this person got this person got that, no problem. The same tests were given to them again, and all the factors were removed, identified factors. You didn't know who it was, name, gender, race, whatever. In those instances, the black kids' grades raised by 15, 20%. When you didn't know they were actually black. And so it's been proven, multiple studies, that teachers in England, I don't know about the US, and I'm sure it's exactly true here, but I know England for sure because I've researched this, they mark black kids as dumber than they are and white kids as smarter than they are.
Right.
And so then that affects where you can go to college, university. So it's going to be hard to become a doctor, become a lawyer when your teachers are literally marking you to appear as dumb as possible. In England, the poorest kids in the country. So when you talk about kids who are on free and reduced meals in England, when the parents have the same income, the kids are the same socioeconomic status, the highest performing students are kids of African immigrants like me. The Congo, Nigeria, Ghana. They're the highest by far. They outperform similarly poor white kids, similarly poor black Caribbean kids who came from the Caribbean. And that's never spoken about. The youngest person to take the highest exam in England, the GCSEs, is a black kid. Romani Wilfred has the same IQ as Einstein. He's black. Anytime these things happen, black is never offered up as a reason for why this is happening. When you are black and you are exceptional, you regain your individuality. When you are black and you are negative, it's those blacks. They're savages. They kill each other. I think it's important to have LeBron James. It's important to have Barack Obama going through. It's important to have Oprah, Jay-Z, whoever is at the highest positions in different fields. I would love us to highlight black doctors, black lawyers, black people, black pilots. I would love that, because as much as I want the ideal world, I'm learning you have to negotiate the world as it is. The world we live in is built in this certain way, but we also should normalize other normal professions that we don't. But let's also ask the question, why aren't there a significant desire in the black community to become doctors, lawyers, teachers, etc.? Because one, those things aren't glamorized to us, and two, the students who have the brains to do it are being marked as dumber than they actually are by white teachers.
I think you have to see it from an evolutionary standpoint, don't you? Like that there's an evolution of generation to generation movement. My kids are being taught race in a very different way than I was, and then my parents were.
But even with that, I agree. Generations, I just remove. I think for me, my optimistic view would say, well, I mean, we're hundreds of years away from actually being where we should be. Like it's
being optimistic.
That long. Yes, that's optimistic, because when you think that the first black girl to attend when schools were integrated, the first black girl to attend an all-white school, she's now a woman who's 68 years old. She's alive. She has an Instagram account. She's on social media. She,
Right.
you know, she's alive. So, and that she was the first black girl was a historic moment, and that's just in our lifetime, for example. So I think the fact that people are alive now who, as kids, their parents took them to public lynchings, where railroad companies would have special tickets, commemorative tickets. There were flyers posted to come and watch the lynching. Schools would give you the day off, for example. And you've seen the pictures of black bodies hanging and kids staring in amazement at what they're seeing, and that doesn't leave you, I don't think, without some serious work. So those people are alive now. They're police people, they are governors, they are legislators. That is where I think, even if these people die out, we need to free 4 more generations to die out, because it's so deeply ingrained. And sometimes I get the buzzwords like, 400 years of oppression, and it kind of can just lose its meaning. But 400 years is a very long time for people to have a collective foot on their neck kept down simply for being black. You just get over the George Floyd protest, and then you see the guy the other day, Jacob Blake, get shot 7 times in the back. And then we're going to get angry about this. And in 2 months, there'll be another one. And so it's trauma porn where black bodies are routinely put on TV, because police do kill white people as well. They do. We never see the videos. Never see the videos. But black bodies always paraded there. Yeah. So I think those things, just there's too many folks who are alive now that as kids, they saw so many things. And as kids who are growing up now, who are seeing things, and we're still very far from being where we should be, because in 2016, I never thought I would see it with my own eyes, where you have a presidential candidate openly endorsed by the KKK. Like, openly. They didn't hide it. This was an open endorsement. And it kind of was just on the news on Monday, and then on Tuesday we're talking about he paid off a porn star to do this and that. And it kind of just moved on from the KKK openly endorsing a presidential candidate, because he reflects their values. So I think we're far away from that, but we will get there. Just take a long time.
I was drinking coffee here, and this line from Malcolm X kept going through my mind when he was talking about the only thing I like integrated is my coffee. Was the air in Malcolm X's thinking that he could somehow, like, it seems like in my lifetime, I want to change this. And the only way to do that is to build an entirely separate system, right?
Yeah.
And is the air in his thinking that he didn't see with that long view going, okay, we're going to change this over generational periods? I mean, maybe Emma, grasp that in some way that he didn't.
And Malcolm wasn't the first. So like Marcus Garvey, initially, he advocated for African Americans to return to Africa
for the Africans. Yeah.
And so that was, so he was in a long line, but I understand the thinking completely, because it shouldn't be on the ones who are being oppressed to beg people to allow us in. Can we use your churches? Can we use your restaurants? Can we use your water fountains? Can we use your pools? Listen, if you don't want us, no problem. Just give us, he said, 3 states in the South, wherever it was, and we'll just go there. We'll start our own and we'll thrive. He said that. But the reason it wouldn't have worked is any time in history, obviously the Tulsa massacre being the most obvious example. Anytime black people have begun to thrive and actually build their own community, like in 1919, was it, with Black Wall Street, it gets bombed, it gets destroyed, it's never allowed to actually thrive. So that would have happened there anyway. But I think that was his thinking. It just was, you don't want to be in a position where you're asking the people that are oppressing you for handouts and to please allow you in and to please. And so you have the idea. But the issue is the African American doesn't know who they are. And then they'll go to Africa and they'll quickly discover that the Africans don't know who they are. So
this is the experiment of Liberia, right? I mean, Liberia had this fascinating experiment where, I mean, I've known people that have been in that part of that region of Africa, and they talk about how the Africans that descend from American slaves have a certain type of elitism, which is really fascinating that they kind of brought that mentality back to that space, you know?
I always think about a certain kid called Ota Benga, who was born almost exactly 100 years before I was born, in the same part of the Congo. He's from the Congo. He was just born 100 years before me. He actually was brought to Belgium. He was in a human zoo. So paraded with chimpanzees, with gorillas, and with apes and monkeys. He spent about 3 years there, literally being dehumanized in that way. And then he finally got his escape, and within 3 years, he committed suicide.
Yeah.
And he was one of many examples. And there was human zoos in the Bronx. There were human. So that idea that if I just been born 100 years earlier, I could, like, it's still, and that's happening in Africa. And the British Empire, England, it's a very small island, has invaded all but 22 countries. Mm-hmm. And that for me is something that's not talked about enough. When I was 10 years old, went on a field trip, and I couldn't believe it. I'm in the British Art Museum, and we walked past an artifact that says it was from the Congo, and I couldn't believe it. And I'm like, wait, why is this here? And she just nonchalantly said, a white teacher, she just said, oh, we own it now in that sense. And I just couldn't understand. Even the Rosetta Stone, which is how we figured out how the Egyptians wrote and spoke, is in the British Art Museum. Why is that not in Egypt? Why does the Queen of England, historically, and the King of England, some of the jewels and their crowns are African jewels? England has no all your reserves and gold mines. But so that's the idea. I don't understand that. And then when Egypt or Nigeria or anyone, Angola, ask these European countries for their stuff back, they offer to loan it back at interest. And no one says anything.
Yeah.
And that idea that we can just take your resources, now it's ours, and you have to. So I think it's so strange for me that the British Art Museum that's looting. Looting isn't going into Walmart to profit in a protest and taking a TV. I don't care about that. Looting is when you uproot entire nations and you take all their resources, they stay poor, and you become rich off of that. And you do it in their face, and you have laws to protect you. So that is where African Americans go back to Africa, you have the same problems because they're under colonization for similar period of time. And the thing I'll say that's funny about this is this. I just found this out recently, that in 1833, England and, in all their benevolence, ended slavery, and there were such good people that said, this is wrong, we've come to our senses, we must end slavery. Okay, I went to research, how did they actually do this? When England in 1833 ended slavery, they actually took out a loan against themselves, against the British government, for £20 million at the time in 1833. The loan was to repay the slave masters for their loss of property. They were about to lose their workers and their servants, so we're going to repay you for your loss of property. And that loan, 1833, 20 million, was so big that it only finished getting repaid in 2015, and actually in today's money it's 17 billion. Now, how was the loan paid? It was paid through British taxpayers' money. So you had black people in England, like my dad and my brothers and my sisters, going to work in England, and a portion of their paycheck was going back to pay the people that owned their ancestors. Reparations for the oppressor. And that was and it only got unsealed in 2018. So you spent almost 200 years repaying people that owned you for your freedom. But we say today reparations is completely impossible for black people. But every other oppressed group and the oppressors have received reparations except Africans. So those things I just find interesting.
I have for a while looked at professional sports and believed what I see in professional sports is a type of slave mentality. I see a slave system. And of course we see it, right? When someone like Kaepernick takes a knee, everybody starts shouting about how these guys are making so much money. Now, guys like you and I that kind of work a little bit behind the scenes in professional sports realize that most people aren't doing that. They're not making that money. Your average NFL career is 2 years. 78% of players go bankrupt or suffer financial hardship when their careers are over. And it's like the relegating the black body is only good for its ability to physically produce. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In this way. And so it's a weird thing because I really believe that the entire system should be completely torn down. I don't even know if I'd restart it, but if we did, it would have to be from a radically different place.
As a whole, the leagues and that, I've been aware for a long time who actually owns and who actually runs them, who actually makes decisions, how you're valuable to a point. You're as valuable as what your body can produce. I've always sort of been aware of that. The Kaepernick situation didn't surprise me in the slightest. Because you're supposed to be seen and not heard. The second you begin to speak up about certain things, you're not going to be protected. So that I understood. One small thing I'll say is when the George Floyd protest began and everyone was saying, well, the Brown should speak up and this person should speak up and that person should speak up, I actually thought the opposite. I felt it was time for Drew Brees and Tom Brady and Peyton Manning and David Beckham, whoever, white, powerful athletes to finally speak up as well. Because they kind of get to coach Dubai, for example. So yes, black bodies for sure is, again, when you're earning that level of money that you can in the NFL or NBA, if things go well, it's difficult for people to comprehend how you can say you're in a type of slavery, for example. But what I will always say is whoever can shut you up, that's who actually owns you. And only a select number of athletes can't be shut up. And that's LeBron James and maybe 2 or 3 others who can actually be in the position now with enough power to say as they will. And the NBA is a bit different because they're very progressive, great commissioner. The NFL is maybe the better example here. So no, I agree with you 100% completely. I think with MLS, the money there's good money in MLS. It's not life-changing money. And I think because of that, you can work in tech and IT or whatever and make the same money. So it didn't feel special in that sense, apart from you get to do it on TV in front of people. But I think at the NFL and NBA levels, that's where it'd be hard to convince someone I make $10 million a year, but I'm in a type of slavery, even though it completely, absolutely is. It completely, absolutely is. Yeah. And you're as valuable as your body. And many of them realize that to a certain point. But yeah, so I agree with you. What the solution is, what the alternatives are, that I don't know. When you talk about changing the system, some small things you can do, for example, is when you receive resumes to completely take off names, take off race, take off gender. just the qualifications. Let's start there. Then you don't know. And then only have that info revealed to you when you're at the stage of actually deciding to do a background check where you're going to hire this person.
Right.
Because it's been proven multiple times when you see a name, Jamal Adams or John Smith, you're not going to hire Jamal Adams because you just think right away that, or Shanika something, or Tanisha something, she's not going to get hired. And so that is where let's just remove the gender, the name, all of that, just the way they went to school, their qualifications, their background. If they can start doing that, you'll start to see more black decision makers, because they posted the black squares and Black Lives Matter is great. The only question I had for any of them is, from Amazon down to the mom and pop shops, is in your company, how many black people can make decisions that actually change the direction of your company? And everyone I spoke to, the answer was zero. There's very few. Where all the MLS teams, all these people, that kind of black voice really decide, no, the ownership and that, they're not black. The GMs are not black. So we're still a very long way, even in the front office side of things as well.
I wanted to ask your opinion on kind of the current efforts that MLS has made during like the MLS is Back tournament, where all the coaches are wearing Black Lives Matter shirts. They're taking a knee at the beginning of the thing. Is this just token? Is it symbolic? Is it real?
I'm conflicted, because on the whole, when I saw the English Premier League do it and different people do it, and the NBA and NFL, it's performative activism. That's what it really is, essentially. I held my optimism because I felt if there can be follow through, it makes sense and it'll be worth it. With this kind of thing, the follow through doesn't have to be 5-6 years. You can do things now. You have the resources now. You spend money on things all the time. Just put money here. So I'm still waiting to see real follow through in certain things. The NBA were exempt from that because they've always been, as far as I've seen, on the right side of that. They were doing it as far back as Eric Garner was being choked out on different things. They've been on the side of that. The NFL was hypocrisy. When your commissioner comes out and your ownership completely blackballs a guy for saying black bodies are being murdered and no one's doing anything about it, and then you completely blackball him, and then you post a black square and Black Lives Matter, that's a slap in the face, to be completely honest. It's the height of hypocrisy. So I think we've seen a lot of performative activism because it is the easiest time in our history to be outspoken. That's why I'm not impressed. Because no one was speaking in 2016 when Kaepernick did it. Nobody supported it. No one, no Amazon, no Facebook, no Starbucks didn't make a commercial. Wells Fargo didn't say we care. They didn't care. The tide has changed. Now it's actually easy to speak. So anyone can do it. Let's wait when it becomes difficult again. Who will be speaking there? That's when I'll be a little bit impressed. I grew up in Tottenham, North London, which in 1985 was the site of the famous London riots in 1985, when a policeman they broke into a home to arrest a guy. They scared his grandmother. She was older. She had a heart attack. She died. It was like we call it council estates, here we call projects, and these massive high-story buildings. And the community was very knit. It was Jamaican and African primarily, and they heard about it, and they actually barricaded the policeman in, and he couldn't leave. And so when he called for backup, there was the backup coming to save him, and in between him and his backup was this 80, 90 residents of the place. And he tried to make his escape, and he was stabbed 90 times and died.
Oh my God.
And that was PC Keith Blakelock, and that led to riots. That was 1985. In 2011, a guy we all grew up with where I'm from called Mark Duggan was stopped in a taxi and killed by police. When the story broke on the BBC that night, it said Mark Duggan fired first and the police shot in self-defense, which of course we knew was complete lie already. The next day it came out, it was proven he was completely unarmed. He was killed. So we went to protest, and that sparked the London riots of 2011, which spread across the country. So we've seen that over the time happen in Ferguson with Michael Brown, and it happened with George Floyd, and etc. So every now and then, something will be so shocking, so graphic that it will spark an uprising for the most part. But I also think for people like myself, I didn't go to one march for the George Floyd thing. I didn't go to one protest because when George Floyd things happened, it didn't change what I tried to do anyway. I tried to live in this space anyway. So it kind of was a continuation of what we live anyway. What would have happened is a lot of white people suddenly became aware, like, oh my God, this is insane. He had his knee on his neck, and we can't believe this. It happens all the time. It happens all over the world. It happens that the police have been killing black bodies for centuries. This is not a new thing. So, but there will be another one in 2 months. I know for a fact.
Let me ask a question. I am curious. This is going to be kind of a funny question, but what would advance the evolution, or I don't know what the right word is, the evolution of Black consciousness and the awakening of American consciousness when it comes to this issue more coming up? A Biden presidency or another term of Trump?
To be my complete honest opinion, yes, there is a difference. I don't personally see the difference in most of these people because the policies that have been enacted from the Clintons, the Bushes, Obama, Trump, whoever, it's never been for the benefit of the majority of the people, especially minorities. So I think Trump's had his run. I think we do need to see Biden, because Trump has, if you're not shocked and jaw dropped and outraged by what's taken place, the fact that a man who 7 of his inside cabinet people have been arrested in the last 2 years, 7 of them. Like, this is not a normal thing. This is not like we're seeing the highest levels of corruption. So I don't think we need that anymore. It's too angry. Biden can come in. It'll be a bit calmer. We can have more dialogue, but only if Biden and his people does the work. What I feel will happen is there'll be a collective sigh of relief. Oh, we got Trump out. Biden, everyone's going to come down. Life will go back to normal. They're not going to have to still deal. Because whether Trump's president, whether Biden's president, it doesn't matter for a black person. It doesn't matter. The majority, some it does, if you're protected by class. But the majority who live under the poverty line, etc., it doesn't matter who's in. They were catching hell way before Trump was there. Trump didn't invent any of this. He just exposed some of it, but he didn't invent most of it. Racists aren't even that creative. There's like 20 talking points they have all the time, and they use them all the time. And once you understand what those are, you can figure out Fox News. I see an incident happen, I know exactly which of the 20 Fox News is going to pull, for example. They might go to the black on black crime, what about Chicago angle? Or they might go to, why'd you have a chip on your shoulder? They might go to, well, if you only process it this way. There's only a few of them. And once you educate yourself on those, like the black on black crime one, I spent 2 years studying that, and it's the most laughable notion ever, because the data completely refutes any such thing. So it doesn't help when you have black intellectuals who align themselves with white supremacists like Candace Owen, etc., and they repeat these talking points, because then a white person uses them to say, see, I'm not racist. That black person agrees with me. It reinforces them. So whether Biden's in or not, that will continue. So I don't think it changes that much.
You're from the Congo. I know that you've gone back. I don't know how many times. I know you went back and didn't you play with the national team at one point too?
Yeah, so I played national team. We played that game actually in Paris. So only one time, only 2015 I was back there, yeah.
When you went back, did you feel that sense, that weight kind of come off you in terms of like, I don't have to cross the street?
So I grew up in London, but I grew up in a very like Congolese house, because our food, our music, we spoke French, we spoke different Congolese dialects. Everyone around us was immigrants. We had Nigerians, Ugandans, South Africans, like Ghanaians. And then we had like Turkish and Somalians and everybody. So I always grew up around that anyway. But when you go back, no, they know you're not native at that point. They know you're from Europe, or they know. And right away, they treat us essentially how they treat any Europeans. He has to have money. How can I get close to him? How can I get some? So essentially, you end up being treated in that way. But there is a spiritual connection. There is a home connection. There is a, wow, this is where I belong. And for me, as I'm educating more about Africa, it's just like, wow, how stupid was I to believe what they told me this place was just jungles and animals and this and that. And it's such a beautiful place. And they've done a very good job brainwashing us to that thing. Because the point where I would even have, as a young kid, certain prejudices where if I was on a plane and an Arab Muslim person / got on, I would be nervous. I'm like, this is not okay. Yeah. Why am I this person just trying to get home like I am? But it's such a great job that terrorists right away. And the fraction of Muslim people that commit terror acts is 0.0000001%. It's not even worth mentioning. So of course not that person, but I've had to do a lot of training myself for which stereotypes I've accepted. Like the Muslim community, for example, we never give them credit for inventing the guitar or bringing coffee to the Western world, or, mathematics. They get no credit for that. But one is behind one bombing. It's now the entire race that needs to be demonized. We have to ban them. They can't come. So it's very strange how that always happens for any people. But the Arab world is responsible for those things. We don't mention that Black people had been to Mexico and to what is now the United States long before Columbus had come, long before they come, because they found spears and different weapons that were native to Western Africa that were here when Columbus came. So that's been proven multiple times. It's been proven a bunch of times that the best universities were in Africa in the 13th, 14th century, Timbuktu being the most famous one. That Mansa Musa, the king of Mali, is the richest man to have ever lived, worth probably today 400, 500 billion. Or Shaka Zulu, how great of a warrior he was. Or the Haitian Revolution, for example, which is the only recorded revolt against slavery that was successful. There's been many revolts against slavery. I used to sometimes think, well, my ancestors really just dormant, accepting it, and they actually weren't. They always rose up, tried to get free. One successful. Haiti actually had a successful one. At the time, it wasn't called Haiti, it was called Saint Domingue, and they were ruled by France and Spain and the British government, and they fought it off. And actually for 18 years were their own independent country until they were recolonized and re-enslaved. So those things you'd never learn, you don't think of. But when you're in Africa and you have your feet there, or I'm around Africans, especially Congolese people, it feels like home. There is a home thing. And I've been gone since I was 4 years old. I'm not there. But that I will say, like, even when I went to the Congo national team, it was so much better for me than the Sounders locker room. Oh, I was walking out the whole way hearing Congolese music. Our pre-game meal was all the food I eat at home. This is unbelievable. This is amazing. So I love that part of it. But yeah, just there's a lot of unlearning I'm still doing as well. Just you accept certain stereotypes about that place, those people. And it's completely ridiculous. Even stereotypes of, how violent the black youth are in London, things like that. And I actually went and researched it, and it's obviously not true. So yeah, but in terms of home, is even though they know I'm not a person that grew up there or lives there, you still feel like I'm with them, absolutely.
What's next for you, man? What's on your horizon? What are you thinking? I mean, because right now I know you're still doing commentary work. You still got your podcast, Winging It with Steve Zakuani. You and Brad Evans are always having some really fascinating guests. And any of you guys are just soccer or football fans that are listening, check that podcast out, because it's not just about the Sounders, even though it is. There's a lot of Sounders, pro Sounders stuff. But it's actually, you guys have a lot of commentary about even politics and everything else that's going on. It's very intelligent stuff. What are you thinking about now?
So there's a couple things. So I've actually been conducting interviews myself. I don't know yet what I'm going to do with them. I just wanted to have about 20, and then I could decide what to do. I've spoken to Abigail Disney, who's the heiress of the Disney family.
Right.
She's a grandkid, granddaughter. But she never worked for the company. She always attacks the company. She wants to give all her money away. She was a fascinating conversation. I've spoken to different people like that. So that's a part of it. But I think I'm trying to fight because I hate the process. I hate the getting started process of writing a book, but I actually enjoy writing a book. But just the getting started, because I know it's going to be hell for the next few months. But I'm going to write maybe a small book, those kind of 20 observations I said that are kind of rebuttals, to kind of just write a simple guide of where it came from, why it's wrong, and if confronted with so, if you're a black person, you're confronted with so, how to answer it with data and logic. And then if you're a white person, why you shouldn't go to those tropes. Like, I'll give you an example. For example, like I would always hear, black on black crime, and it's really bad, and so on, so on. And at first, I always was conscious that we never use the term white on white crime, even though, the majority of black people are killed by black people because they're in proximity. The majority of white people are killed by white people. Chinese kill the most Chinese. Turkish kill you kill people that you live around. That's where your disputes will be. That was that. So, but black on black crime is reserved just for when the victim is black and the perpetrator is black. That's the only time.
That's the only time we ever hear a term in that framework at all, is black on black.
Yeah, but it's but the murder rates among different races of people are at the same clip. There's no big disparities, nothing like that. But it reinforces the idea that black people are inherently violent. It's just something they're drawn to. So, for example, London in England, London's not in the top 5 for most violent cities in the UK. So when you go to the majority white cities like Manchester, or Glasgow in Scotland, which is way worse, they will try to explain why it's happening. But when the victim is black, the perpetrator is black, it's a black thing. So in Glasgow, years ago, they were the murder capital among youth violence. What did they do in Glasgow? They did 4 things. One, they realized that the kids who are in prison, 50%, I think it's 51% of them were expelled from school. To the point where the education minister, tongue-in-cheek, said, when we expel a kid from school, we may as well give them their prison sentence there and then.
Right.
So that was a sign. 2, they were exposed to domestic violence in the home. And 3, masculinity was a part of it. And then 4, they lived in relative poverty. So those 4 factors were the most common themes among youth that attacked youth. Right. So what did Glasgow do? They didn't incarcerate the kids. They implemented programs that made sure kids weren't expelled, that made sure that families could actually afford to live, so poverty was raised. And then the knife crime and the violence went way down. Right. When those same issues presented themselves in England, the same government, same people, suddenly had a whole different response because it was black people. Right. They did a campaign. They worked with fast food chicken shops to put messages on the packaging, as if only black youth eat chicken. But, black people just happen to love chicken. So they literally said, that is what we're going to do to tackle knife crime. They presented a whole different set of solutions when we know what it is. It is relative poverty. It is masculinity. It is witnessing domestic violence. And it is being when you're expelled from school and you don't have no guidance. So that is what leads to violence. However, 1.3 million black people in London, I think it is. I think somewhere close to that, maybe a little bit less than that. And there were, in a bad year, anywhere from 25 to 40 stabbings. So 1.3 million people, and 40 of them are doing stabbings, but it's a whole black problem.
Yeah.
Those are the things we're trying to say. It's like, and then when you take the top 50 cities in the world, in the whole world, the top 50 most violent murder cities, the highest stats. If you remove South Africa, because that's kind of a unique situation, there is not one African city in the top 50.
Right.
But if black people are just so disposed to violence inherently, why are the African cities not inherently more violent? Right. Ghana is extremely more peaceful than the United States and Great Britain. Naples is one of the most violent cities. I never hear about the Naples Italian olive on olive crime. I don't hear about that. No. So some of those things I think is when you hear Chicago, it's bad, it's this, always think of those 4 factors. That is what's happening there. If you take any group of humans, put them anywhere on earth, and you introduce those 4 factors, violence will ensue. Right. If you want to reverse the violence, you fix those indicators, those factors. There is still a measure of personal responsibility, but I'll give you this last example, because I grew up there under those 4. I didn't see domestic violence, but I was a male, relative poverty, and I'd been expelled from school as well. Sure. So I lived under that. But now I live a relatively comfortable life, a pretty decent life. It's as if I would wake up and say, the only thing missing from my life is I haven't stabbed another black guy. I better go and do that. Then my life will be complete. And it's completely ridiculous, because when you improve someone's life, they're drawn away from violence.
Right.
So that is the part where I think, and that's a conversation for another day, but that's where my study now, what I'm researching personally, is the link between race and class as well.
Yes.
Because black people like myself, like my kids, they're going to go to horse riding lessons, yoga, they'll take skiing vacations, they'll do all these things that middle class white people do. It's weird. I guess black folks like wine too. We like vacations too. We're not just savages, but we need a little bit of money first. But the majority don't have it. And so they end up in being statistics in a sense. But it's not because of race. These are the indicators.
Well, I hope when that book comes out, you'll come back on and we can talk about it. And we can.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I hope you'll let me design the cover for it, because I got to. I already got an idea. My brain started working right away. I was like, oh my God, I got so much going on.
Yeah, I just want to say to everyone listening, to always remain hopeful, and that's on an individual basis and also collective. No matter how dark it gets, how difficult it gets, and life can get very tough sometimes, you should never ever lose your hope. Keep hope and always believe that the best is yet to come.
Steve, thanks so much. Seriously, thank you so much for taking the time. This was a real pleasure. And it was actually just cool to be able to kind of have a chat with you, because I've gotten information from you secondhand from Seth for years. And it's just really cool to get to know you a little bit. And I really appreciate it.
Man. Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it, man.
The Voyagers podcast is produced by Sugar Sled Productions and recorded in Kula on the island of Maui. It's hosted by me, David Glenn Taylor. If you enjoyed what you heard, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. It's really, really helpful to get the word out there. And if you're interested in becoming a sponsor or in supporting this podcast, go to www.voyagerspodcast.com and click the link in the top right-hand corner of the homepage to become a Patreon supporter. And to become a sponsor, let's just start a conversation by email at david@voyagerspodcast.com. Next week, we're going to attempt to wrap our heads around how a team of ridiculously intelligent people could take on the challenge of taking a picture of the surface of the sun. If you want to know what it sounds like when my brain is cramping, have a listen, because we sit down with Paul Jeffers, the Integration Execution Manager for the NOAA Solar Telescope, and we talk about what it takes to accomplish one of the world's most difficult astronomical tasks. That's next week on the Voyagers podcast. Mahalo for listening, friends.